Thank you. And thank you for all the organizing that happens here. There's a lot of people that are doing stuff that maybe they wouldn't choose to do if they were totally selfish. And it's for each one of us, for all of our benefits. And I'm so glad you mothers get to just sit and not worry about the next meal and enjoy each other and enjoy just being part of the larger group. We all need breaks from our routine, no matter how good those routines are. So I can't help it. I really got into this previous hour that Eric was leading us in. And I'm really interested in gossip because it's kind of like storytelling. I have this observation to just submit to you for your consideration, and that is, gossip involves it can be extremely wide net, and it can be anything you say about somebody else, but what we really need is malicious gossip, and gossip that is zero-sum, where I'm dropping that ugly little thing to kind of raise me up and push you down in an unfair way. So it helps if we define a little bit. So there's two things that I think, and you can help me think about this a little bit, that are the good thing about the idea of gossip. One is, in a community where people will talk about it, it's kind of like a discipline against someone who has like evil urges and wants to do them privately. And sometimes people will stop and think and not do that, not bully, because they don't want to be thought of badly, and they know that some people will talk about them. So just kind of the other side of the coin. And then there's one other thing. There are times if we have a pure heart, we may not easily suspect someone of abuse, but it happens. And sometimes if we're too forceful in saying, don't talk about bad things, we can have somebody who is being abused and has no outlet at all because they're weak and they're being overwhelmed. And we want to be sensitive to that and have space so that if somebody really needs to reach out and say, look, I'm in this relationship and it's not good and I can't do anything about it, that we will then. And I think it goes to that third thing. Is it necessary? And sometimes it's hard, but it's necessary. So just that little bit for your consideration. And I'm not advocating for just all those things we don't want. But there are some things that what we might call gossip do to help preserve the righteousness and the spiritual health of individuals. Listen up. Thank you so much for bringing that up, Eric. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about fables and legends. And am I coming through clear enough? You're hearing it way back there. So, the aspen knots. I love winter sports. When I go out to the Front Range, or even further in Colorado in the wintertime, and I strap on my snowboard, I go back to New Glarus, Wisconsin in my mind, and I become that little boy trudging up the hill with my flexible flyer. And it's all cold and wet, and I'm excited and I'm warm in my jacket, and I get to the top and I lie down on that sled and I head down the kind of little trail, and it is scary because I go fast. And I'm likely to just wipe out totally and get all wet. And I get snow in my mouth and it tastes so good. And here I am, 60 years old, and I'm trying to go my age in miles per hour, with the gap and stuff. And I can still do it, I will have you know. And I think for a few more years it's going to work out. But I go back to that happy place as a little boy. And I love to go through the aspen groves. Aspens are one of the largest living organisms in the world because you have one aspen seed and this shoot comes up, and then the roots go out, and another tree, and you can see those groves, and they're huge, covering the whole mountainside. And the leaves are beautiful in the fall, and they stay on for a while. They turn that golden kind of yellow, and they flutter, and the trunks are sort of whitish. Maybe you have those in Minnesota. But out there, and they look a little bit like birch bark, white birch. And there are eyes in there. They're knots, and they're shaped a little bit like an eye. Maybe like on an Egyptian painting, you know, that eye, and they're dark. And there's a legend that goes with that. The people who lived around there said the ancestors' spirits would go and live in those huge, eternal, combined aspen groves. And the warning to the young people was, when you walk through the aspen groves, don't look directly into those knots, because the ancestors look out through those. Those are their eyes. And it's not reverent, it's an affront to stare the elders in the eye. And I thought that was really interesting when I heard that. But and they said, if you do that, they'll reach out with their foot and they'll trip you. So just let that be a lesson, right? Well, the practical part of that is when you're learning to snowboard through the aspens, one of the advices I always give to the new people is, you go where you look. So make sure you look between the trees, not at them. Because the trees are not nearly as much fun as the snow. And it's fun partly because it's dangerous, and you have to be quick, and you have to be focused when you're doing this sort of thing. I don't quite understand, the risk that boys need to take and in order to feel fulfilled and happy, but I know it's there, and I know I'm a boy. So legends, well, we chuckle. They have important truths in them, and sometimes they're just kind of, peripheral or shallow truths, and sometimes they're pretty deep about the tradition of honoring the elders. That's the thing that we understand as Christians. We look to the old scriptures and to the forefathers and the foremothers, and we see how they have lived, and we want to be aware of that as we wend our way. So I want to hit a few more just tips in telling stories and why we do it before I go into the story I have for you right now. So you get your pens out and your papers. Editing is a really big deal, no matter what you do when you communicate. What you don't say is often more critical than what you do say. You have this good idea and you think, well, I gotta get every side of it and just thorough and complete. Well, my cousin Mary, husband William, when he was ordained to be a minister and later a bishop in the Amish church in Bloomfield, Iowa, and it was his turn for the first time to do the Adnokskme Alfela, and that's basically twice a year when you have your it's the service before communion, and you go through the Old Testament, the story of faith. Mary said to William, now William, when the big hand is on the 12, you stop. Because she knows, the mind can only absorb what the seat can endure. She's smart, she's my cousin. And William got up there and he started, on his section, and he went from Adam to the fall of Ai. That problem there? No, he had the second part, because the first minister did up to there, and then he was kind of work it all the way through the minor prophets and get to the end, And he went till 12:45. And on the way home, after everything was said and done, she looked at him And she raised her eyebrows. And she said, "William, didn't you remember what I said?" And he said, "But Mary, I wasn't done. There was some more stuff. I had to say it." And she said, "You know that hydrant out by the barn? You know how it's connected underground to the rural water, and it goes all the way in there to the reservoir right over there by Bloomfield. And there's that water tower there, and there's a pump, and it makes the water go up in there, and then it comes out here. You'll never get all the water out of the reservoir with that handle up there. Your job is not to get all the water out. Your job is to put the handle down at 12 o'clock. That's really good lesson for storytellers and for everybody that speaks in public. That'll get you a long way down the road if you learn that. We heard Eric talk about the persistence of emotional memory. We do that in our conversations, in our storytelling. Those moments when we have strong emotional responses stick with us and we can't help it, we have to remember them. Use those to good effect and be thoughtful and careful and kind. You all know this, but there are a million questions from two-year-olds and three-year-olds. And I think some of the responses, even biblical ones in the Bible, are responses to that. You just tell a story. Because if you answer it straight up with a simple response, you just get a why immediately. And there's no end. And I was over at the Gingrich's last night, and there were some Yoders and some Gingrich children around me. And I got like a little bit nervous because I thought they were just gonna like eat me up, you know. It's like, I would barely get the amen out of one story and they were like, "Tell me another one." And you get a little fearful, you know. So how am I gonna get out of here? So that's just kind of a funny observation there maybe. Stories are important in one way because they help us to accept the problematic nature of life without being overwhelmed by our problems. It's a way of dealing with really hard things, or difficult things, or conundrums. It just doesn't make sense. A good response is a story of your ancestor, of a saint, of some biblical character who grappled with that. And we know we're not going to get it all figured out, but we will be able to somehow come to some level of peace with that problem. This is a little bit of an aside, but people talk about education, you know, and they're worried, you know, because I don't have the proper degrees or whatever, and I'm just not quite as able to do life well. I like this definition of education. It's Thomas Ehrlich, and he said, education should equip you to entertain three things: a friend, and an idea, and yourself. So if you think about that, you can think of people who are quite well educated and they don't have a lot of formal education, but they're pulling their weight, they're leveraging their influence, and they're people that we need around us. So don't focus too much on formal education. Focus on staying a student all your life and giving, of teaching other people, and in that process also teaching yourself and learning from other people. I'm totally with you. Some of the harshest, rudest criticism is the most necessary for me to consider. And maybe they're wrong, and I could really point out some of the ways that they just didn't get it right. But the part I want to avoid is the part that just like is right there, and I know I needed that. I needed to change that. And so my job is to simply recognize that and work on that. And if I can muster enough grace, say thank you. Sometimes I have to wait a while and then I can do that. So thanks for that. I want to talk for a minute about imagination. Sometimes people get so hung up with you've got to say the truth, and they're like trying to teach their children the difference between the imagination and the real world, that they get kind of vicious. And there's stuff to be learned from those pearls, you know, the people that write the book about child training, and they say it's like training a horse. But I'm a little twitchy if people get over, you know, you're laughing, so I think you know what I'm talking about. Like they see a 1-year-old as a little tiny adult, and they kind of impose a sort of form on that child that they simply cannot do. My understanding from just listening to children talk is they're often 3 or 4 or 5 years old before they can really distinguish between their dreams and what we call the real world, and maybe their daydreams, their imagination. And so what we don't want to do is get too vicious with children of that age about, well, you were lying, and you've got to face the adult consequences for that. If we can sort of be wise and recognize imagination, and of course we want to distinguish that, and also recognize that that will come. There'll be a time when they can distinguish that better. And the reason is faith involves imagination. It's stuff we can't see, stuff we have to imagine. Heaven, redemption, there's many things in our life like that. And I would submit to you that without a healthy imagination, it's very hard for a young person to become a Christian. So there's a space for that, a healthy space for imagination. I just want to make sure you know, you're trying to find stories. Go to those emotional moments where you have strong fear, strong desires, where you're very embarrassed, where you're angry, where you have deep joy. Those are the emotions and the times when there's something important going on. And you'll either learn from, because you want to modify that, or you recognize that you've really latched on to a deep, important thing. And chances are, if you're a human being and you have those experiences, that's something that a lot of your friends and your enemies also experience. And if you talk about that, you'll resonate. They recognize, wow, that's what I had too. And you'll wake that up, and it will be a powerful moment. Find your voice. If it's something you feel strongly about and you find yourself ranting about it to your friends or people, like as not, that would be the easiest first place to start doing story. So you're familiar with that. Make yourself more familiar with it and go with it and try it out on your friends and see how it goes. A theme is really important in most stories. Now, sometimes you can kind of meander and it's fun, but you do want to know, as the presenter or as the author of something you're writing, what is this, what am I trying to say? What is the key, most important thing? And then you go through it and you edit and you say, is this sentence, is this word, is this phrase, is this paragraph, is it really supporting that most important theme that I'm setting out to? And if it's not, even if it's really like clever words and stuff, just like cross it out and save that for another time when it actually can support the theme. I'm repeating myself a little, but it's important. Sensory language is important. We see, we smell, we touch, we taste, and we hear the things around us. Invoke all of those things in your stories. People will more easily picture what you're after and be with you and get the emotional picture. Bears saying again, shame and pride are the same, or are the opposite sides of the same coin. The problem here is you're thinking about yourself. We're good at that, and we should do that. That's called reflection. But when we're telling a story, work your way to the place where you can leave yourself and your fears and your shame and your pride and focus utterly on the story. Make it a story that's important enough that it's worth doing that. I don't want myself between me, the telling of the story, and you, the receiving of it. I want that story to be, and I want to be in that place between us where the story is taking place and not worrying about, am I coming off all right? What do you think of me and all that stuff? Should you memorize a story? We were talking about that last night. A toast for a wedding. And we talked about the fear thing, you know, where you're the rabbit and all the cats are looking at you. And so my advice was, yeah, first time, something short like that, memorize it. And not just memorize it, take a paper along with it all on there, just in case the cat hits your tongue. Then you can just read it, you know, and you won't be stuck there in utter terror. There's some things, don't look at all the eyes the first time. Look at your sister, the bride, and just talk to her and focus on making it that personal thing. That can be helpful. You know, work your way into it. Start with your friends, start with children. They're a wonderful audience always. They love stories, and they will correct you so gladly. Once you say it once, the second time around, you have to say it exactly the same or they'll point it out to you. You know, you got that wrong. You forgot to say that. Wait a minute, the lion didn't actually do that, he did this. It's fun, kind of. But they're pretty rigorous. So if you're not memorizing in your storytelling, what do you do? Like word for word. In my mind, you know, the way I set up stories, and I work on them and I tweak them, but I think of them as, you know, like comic blocks, you know, like there's this one panel and then the next panel and the next panel, and it's a picture and it illustrates one part of the story. I think that way. I think spatially. When I'm taking an engine apart, I don't write like the words down. I just think about the way it looks, and that is really, it's my strength. So the story is, I'm thinking about the scene in the story, and I'm describing it to you as I see it at the time. And it's not always the same from one time to the next. And because I sometimes can't remember words, it's okay. I'll just see it, and the words that come to me, I'll use to describe the story to you. And then I'll move to the next scene. And if I'm lucky, you know, I won't miss a block, and I'll kind of go through it, and it will sort of make sense to you, and you'll be pleased, and maybe you'll learn something. So, you know, it maybe sounds a little, I'm oversimplifying, but those are the ways that I go at it, and things I've learned that kind of work for me. And I assure you, every one of you, you're full of stories, whether you're speaking them or not. You're being an inspiration to some little child. So what you do is important, and how you walk is important, and what you say. You've got little people who are watching you and saying, this is what I want to be when I grow up. Don't disappoint them. That's enough of that. In 2004, I traveled to Kenya with my sister Regina and her husband Trevor. And the reason for our trip was we were reading that there were a lot of orphans in Kenya among the churches in Kisumu and in Nakuru. And you know, my sister, she survived a near-death experience the AIDS, HIV/AIDS virus. And she felt really grateful, and out of that concern in reading about these people who were dying in Kenya and leading orphans, we went over there to see if there was something we could set up to help them. And we figured out that for $2 a day, we could save a life. And so they set up this little thing so that people wanted to save a life for $2 a day instead of having just a plain coffee or whatever it is you spend $2 on. You could do that because the retrovirus drugs were somehow provided in that country for a much smaller price than in the West. But even $2 a day was beyond the means of many people there. So we were there and we worked on that and we were able to set something up. But while we were there, we were also visiting, the missionaries in the compound. And for me especially, I wanted to get out of the compound, as fast as I could because I wanted to get relevant. I learned that from the hippies. And I rode with some of the really nice Land Rover type machines that the missionaries had, but it didn't suit me because I wanted to see how it's like to be in Kenya. So tuk-tuks were the things that I spotted. And there's these little, kind of shoeboxy cars, and looked like, you could put a family of 4 or 5 in there pretty comfortably. But you know what? You can get 15 or 20 Kenyans in there and their chickens live with their feet tied together. And so I wanted to do a tuk-tuk ride from Nakuru to Kisumu while everybody else, I don't know what they did. They rode in some big nice thing. And I, figured out how to do it. And it was like a ridiculously small amount, like 10 shillings or something, which seemed like 5 cents to me. And I got in and I soon realized that personal space was a little different here. And I got squeezed and squeezed and squeezed until I was just kind of like, between this young woman with the chickens all tied together down here. And I really got a good chance to examine the chickens, and they were skinny. I mean, the skinniest chickens you've ever seen. And they were alive, but they knew they couldn't do anything. They were just like there, And then on the other side of me was this fellow who was about a foot taller than me, and just skinny as could be, and a huge funny sense of humor. And it turns out he was a lawyer. And so we were visiting because he spoke English really quite well, and he was fun. And when you're riding for hours and it's rough and it's dusty and bumpy and all this stuff, you have to be humorful, otherwise you can get kind of depressed. And so he kept talking about those skinny chickens there. He's like, when are we going to stop and have some chicken stew, And the lady there, she kind of knew what was going on, was just joking along, but she was just a little concerned about her chickens. And we were doing this thing and just sort of, bouncing along there and carrying on. And by the time we got to Kisumu, we were really good friends, and he wanted to take me out for a drink, and so I had my orange pop, and we sat and talked, and I felt like I'd gotten relevant a little bit. And my friends were back at the compound, and they were getting really worried, because you never know what happens to, crazy Americans who are off in tuk-tuks with the locals. I made it, and I recommend it to all of you. I remember going to see a well being dug, and one of the deacons, the local deacons, was doing the digging with his helpers, and they dig a hole down about 4 or 5 feet, and then they put a little form in there and fill it with concrete they mixed there, and it was kind of stepped in, so they'd dig a little further, put another form in, and so you'd look down the well and you'd see these steps, and they could just climb right up and climb right down, and they were down about 30 feet, and we could peek down in there, somebody's down there, and these little boys, there's always little boys around, and they would be like standing right by the edge there and kind of, and I watched their toes because I saw their toes were busy doing something independent of the boy. And there were these pebbles, and these little boys, they would be just like working their foot forward just a tiny bit at a time, and the big toe was moving the little pebble over towards the edge. And and they'd wait until they were pretty sure nobody's looking, and then they just like nudge it over and go ding, and if they were lucky, it hit somebody down there. I don't know, it really made an impression on me. It was a wonderful experience to be there. I said, please, I want to go and interact with local Christians. And so, all right, I got my invitation, and it was in Nakuru. And let's walk there. So we walked there, it was 4 miles. And Nakuru is a city on top of an ancient volcanic activity. I don't know if the volcano was there, but it's a thick layer of volcanic dust. And whenever a car went by, this huge cloud of dust went up. It was gray and kind of ashy and sharp. There was no glacier there ever to roll the little edges off. It was sharp dust. And by the time I got there, I understood why all the people I saw had red eyes. Because I had red eyes too from that dust. And we finally got to this brother's house. And it was a row house. And I was really interested because there were about 12 apartments in a row. And then there was a space of courtyard, which was dirt. And then there was another 12. And the apartments were pretty much all the same. They were 11 feet square. And they were constructed pretty much the way kind of a middle-of-the-road chicken coop would be constructed, where I lived, where I came from. And there was this spot for one electric light bulb to screw in there, but they were saving money for school uniforms, so they didn't pay the 20 shillings a month extra, or whatever it was. It seemed like 5 cents to me again. They just, when the sun came up, they got up, and when it was down, they slept. There was a bed in this space, like a bed that, kind of a small double bed, and that was Mom and Dad's bed. And then there was this, and the children there were 6 children, and they were just overjoyed to show me everything. And here's the bed, and this is where Mom and Dad and baby sleep, and then where do you sleep? Well, we sleep at the base of the bed here, the 5 of us, and we just stick our feet kind of under the bed there, and then there's room for us right here. Oh, well, that looks like it should work, kind of, if you don't fight. And they had this one little chest of drawers, and that's where the entire family's clothes were. And most of the clothes they were, of course, wearing. And then the kitchen area was another corner, and it just had like little 3-cornered things in the corner, and then a little kind of cloth over the front. And they showed me very proudly they had the little jug with the oil in it, the cooking oil, and they had the little tin with the flour in it. That was their supplies. And they had not a knife, fork, and spoon each, but they had at least one broken utensil each to like scoop at their stuff. And it didn't matter much because you ate a lot of stuff with your fingers, which I approve of, because I feel like I can taste my food better if I'm digging in it with my fingertips. And they were so pleased to have us there. And the mom went out and she was gonna cook up our lunch. And it was taking a while. And so after a while, she sent the child back to say, the water was off. There was no water, so it was gonna be a little delay. Turns out that looked to me like 100 families had this one little faucet to turn up, and there's this long line, and you waited to fill your bucket, and you take it, and then you'd have water to drink. And for no good reason that anyone knew, the water was off. And so she had to go to the next place where there's public water, and it was quite a walk. And because the water was off, not just in our apartment complex, but in a whole bunch of them, the line was like half a mile long there, and it was 2.5 hours before she came back with water. But we entertained ourselves, and the man of the house was telling me that he works at Lamp and Light, and he corrects those the students' papers that sort of teach would-be Christians how to become Christians. He does that. And so I said, well, what language do you do that in? Well, there's the 4 different local tribal languages that they have them in, and then there's French and English. Well, which ones do you do? Well, he does all of them. He knows all those languages well enough to, check this all out. And he talked a little more and found out that he had a terrible setback. He had saved money for several years, and he bought a bicycle. And that way he didn't have to walk 4 miles to Lamp and Light and back every day. And it was just really wonderful. And it was the most prized possession that family had, that bicycle. And wouldn't you know, one day, And he parked it around, you know, at the lamp and light place back where people shouldn't be able to see it. And did he have a little thing, you know, lock it up? And somebody sneaked in there and cut the lock and stole his bike. And it was really a rough deal because it's like, you know, all this savings and all this convenience, and it was gone. And so I said, well, what did you do? Well, he said, and he got out his little book, and it was like a little tiny notebook, kind of like what I had when I was a little kid in church to write in. He said, I have my little book here, and I had written the serial number of the bike down. And I'm a biker, so I know where the serial number is. It's on the bottom bracket, you know, where the pedals go through, underneath there. Lots of people wouldn't know that. It's stamped on there. And he said, I kept my eye open for that. And it was probably 6 months, and I spotted my bike. And how could he tell? I don't know, because they all look the same to me. He said somebody had stolen and painted it white. It had been black. That he was just sure that was his bike. And it was at a bike shop. And he looked underneath there, and the serial number was the same. And he said he had to really convince the person at the bike shop that he finally was like, look, I have it written in my little book, and I'll be happy to go involve the police. And the man was like, well, I didn't steal it. Somebody brought it here and sold it to me, and I didn't know a thing. But he let him have his bike back. Just to sort of set this up a little bit. So I had to, after we got the water back, started cooking, I had to go see what was going on because they had a common cooking area there. And I said, I need to go to the restroom. So I went to the toilet. And it was not the kind of place you would loiter in. It just wasn't, you know, pretty rough looking outhouse is what it was. But then I came by the cooking area. And I tell you, you know, camp people, you have it really nice, you know, boys camp people. This little shack it was basically one of those 11 by 11 spaces. And the ladies had 1-gallon tin cans that they had carefully like hacked some holes in for air. And they put a little bit of charcoal in there to get the fire going. And then they put their kettle on top of that. And the woman of the house was stirring and making chicken broth and stew. And when she had that all set, then she put the little sort of wok thingy, which was just a piece of metal that she'd found from a 55-gallon drum that somebody had beat on and made it curve a little bit. And she's putting a little bit of oil in there and then putting her chunks of dough, patties I think they called it. And since she had another spot where she was chopping up kasumawiki, which it looked like kale to me. And when the meal was finally ready, we were hungry. And the kids were hungry too, and they were just beaming. And they were putting down those patties, those little fried dough things with a little bit of oil on top of them and eating away. And we were having that wonderful, absolutely beautiful chicken soup. And the dad was saying, I always loved it when we did company when I was a little boy, because it was the only time we got to eat those skinny chickens. It was really nice. And I was sitting there on this little broken bench against the wall, and a whole bunch of children were sort of perched on the edge of the mom and dad's bed here, and some of them were kind of sitting on the floor. And there was this chair. They had one chair, but the whole back was broken off, so you just had the bottom part to sit on. And it was just like the poorest place I'd almost ever been a guest at. And here was this guy who knew 6 languages. And if he'd have been born in the United States or in Canada or just about anywhere else, he would have been solidly middle class with those skills. And he would have had 3 cars, you know. And his kids could have gone to the private school and all that stuff. And I just kind of like, you know, I think I deserve all this stuff because I work hard, you know, and I get what I deserve and stuff. And if I'd have been born there, I'd have been several notches below the sky. Life is not fair. It just isn't. And it really softened my heart towards him. And I blessed him, and I didn't know what else to do. Well, we did all our stuff, and then you know how it is. You know how it is, you do your stuff, and then it's like, well, right over there in Tanzania is Maasai. And you gotta go look at the animals. Well, I soon figured out that all the local people, they knew elephants and giraffes existed, but they had never ever seen any of them. You just can't. You know, when your most expensive, valuable thing in the world is a bicycle, you just aren't going to go on a tour bus and go down there to Tanzania. You can't. You just can't. You know, if you have a bicycle, that means you can ride to church and you can bring your family of 6 along. All on the bicycle. It's absolutely amazing. But we were from the West and we were kind of expected to do that. We went and did that. And it was really quite something. I saw a leopard in a tree, and he had one of those impalas he caught. Big old mama leopard, and that impala with the long spiky horns up in the tree, and she was eating that impala. Because if you're up in the tree, the lions aren't as likely to come and steal your impala. And I'm an apex predator too, so I kind of understood that. You know, I like to eat stuff, you know, that has meat on it. And my other most favorite thing, and we saw a whole bunch of really cool animals, most amazing were the warthog families. So ugly they were cute. And their little brush tails sticking up and bobbling along there all in a row, and the little baby ones, oh my word. So we did all that, and that was fun, and then we stayed in the little camp, hotel, tenty sort of thing, which was all kind of glamorous. Glamping, I think is what they call it now. And then they were like, you know, we could take you over here and you could visit a Maasai village. And I was like, yeah, take me right away. I've read about the Maasai. And so we went and did that, and that was really interesting too. They built this little stockade with little biggish sticks with pointed ends all around. And it was about the lions, because lions know that cows taste good. And you don't want your lions coming at night and eating your cows, because that's your entire family's wealth and livelihood. And so there's a stockade, and inside along the edges of the stockade were the houses, one after the other there. And then in the evening, you bring all the cows in there, everybody from the whole village, and you had this huge thorn tree, and you pulled it in by the end there where there weren't many thorns, and that was the gate. And just go ahead, lion, be my guest, try to get through that, or go over the sharp thingies. And that's the way the cows survived. And it was really interesting to just see all this. And they had this little welcoming thing, and then we kind of gathered in the middle there, and there were these young men, and they were like way up there tall, skinny and tall. I mean, the best basketball player physiques I've ever seen. And they had the guys, everybody, well, yeah, they wrapped checkered white and red tablecloths around them instead of wearing breeches. And it seemed perfectly normal to them. And this one guy was just standing there, and he just looked like he was the king. And he had this funny little dunce hat on, and this one fellow was kind of telling me stuff, and I keep asking, I said, what's with him? Oh, he's very special. Notice those big scars on his arm there? And it's, what's with the hat? Oh, that's a lion skin. It looked really ratty. He said, a piece of a lion skin, he killed it himself. And I said, how did he kill it? Did he shoot it? No. He was guarding his cattle, and this lion was hungry. And so what did he use to do it with? Well, he said, he's holding it right there. And the guy had this stick. It looked like a broomstick. And in the end, he'd somehow drilled a little hole, and he had a piece of 3/8 rebar stuck in there. And he pounded on that end until it kind of flattened out, a little bit kind of pointy like this, and sharpened the edge with a file. And then he wrapped some wire around the broomstick to make so it would stay in there. That's what he killed that lion with. And I was like, wow, yeah, I got some respect now. So he was like that, and they showed, and we talked about cows, and it turns out we had something in common. Because if you're a cow person, no matter where in the world you are, you understand cows. And you know that a twin, like a heifer and a bull twin, is not welcome at all. Because the heifer will always be sterile, and that's not good for your herd. And we talked about that, I don't know why. And we talked about a bunch of cow things. And it was really fun to do, and they showed me how they start fires when they're out, and they need to start a fire. They used a stick, and they'd rub it, and they'd sit. 3 of them would be all around there, and one of them would rub the stick as fast as he could until his hands got so hot he couldn't stand it, and then the next one would grab it and rub and rub and rub, and this way was like cooling his hands off. And then the third one, round and round, and finally smoke started coming out of there, and pretty soon it was like coals, and then they got the fire going, and I was like, wow, yeah, this is good. They've got skill. So then my friend showed me his house. I went to see his house, and I went over and looked closely, and in front of the house was this big pile of kind of fresh green cow manure. And it turns out that was spackling to repair the house with. And you could mix that up with some sand and just the right amount of water, and it would have fiber in it, from whatever the cow ate. And you could just kind of splat that up against the house if parts of it fell off and fix it. And the houses were not high enough to stand straight up. You had to bend down, kind of a curved roof. And they made it with just kind of sticks and then wove some baskety things around it. And inside, for the bed, like the main bed, they had a frame and then a cow skin, and they kind of made a trampoline out of it, and they just put ropes into holes all the way around and pulled it tight, and it was nice and tight and flat. I was like, could I please lie down on that? And it was quite comfortable. And they had a little smoky fire going on right in the middle, because with all that cow stuff around, the flies were pretty thick. And they couldn't come in there because there was just enough smoke not to like make it too miserable for the people, but make it so that the flies couldn't stand it. And there was this row of nails right in the middle. There's like this stick across there, and on the nails were hanging cups. There was a cup for each kid. Their nail, their cup. And I was really impressed with that. And then we did some other stuff, but what I heard then was a little story. And I'm going to say this, and it's about 2 brothers who lived in a little place like this, a stockade with little houses. And you have to understand that there are termites everywhere in that area. And as soon as there's a stick in the ground, the termites find it and they start eating it and digesting it. And so those little houses, what kills them is not rain, it's termites. And finally, if you just like give it a kick, the whole thing will just kind of like, and it's a little pile of common, really. So you try to figure your system out so that you're moving out just before it collapses, from the termites. And Ya and Noe were 2 brothers, and they both were married, and they both had 3 children. And they helped each other with everything. And one day, Ya's wife said to him, Ya, this house is getting shaky. We need a new house. And Ya was like, yeah, you're right, yeah. He was a smart, wise husband. And he went over to Noe and said, Noe, we need to build a new house. Okay, I'll help you. And so they proceeded to go down and chop off little saplings, bring them up, and it just moved down to the end of the row of houses and just started a new house there. And it was not big at all. It was like the size of the house that the man built with taily bone in it, but not as sturdy. And they wove the stuff, and they're working there, and then they gathered the cow manure, lots of cow manure out in the middle there. And they brought sand, and they brought 5-gallon buckets of water from down by the creek. And they kind of made a hollow place, and they were pouring stuff in there, and they were stomping around it with their feet to mix it all up and get it just right. And they were stomping away and having a grand time, and you sing when you do that. And sometimes 2 people hold hands like this, and so they don't trip and fall, and they're both stomping like a dance almost. And all of a sudden, Ya went down on a big old thorn. And it went right through his foot. Stuck out the top. And it was just like, ow, wow, wow, wow. And he was out of there and kind of washing his foot off. And then he had to pull that thing out. And it was just, ooh. And it got infected. What are the chances it didn't? And it was sore, and he was done building the house. All he could do was wrap it up and hope for the best. And Noe had to keep on. He had to do all the rest of the work. And the children were too small to help. They were there, but they were mostly in the way. Finally, that house was all done, and Ya was hobbling around, and he was in the old house, and they saw, he'd come watch and give some advice. And they'd have everything done, right down to the nails for the cups to hang on. And the next morning, Jan and family got their stuff and they started heading over. And they got there, and the house had some smoke coming out of the ends of it. And it was like there were people in there. And it turns out Noe's wife had the same idea that Jan's did. She said, our house isn't worth living in, it's dangerous. And you did most of the work. We're just going to move in there. And there they were with their cups hanging on the nails and everything. What was Jan going to do? He was upset, but you can't just fight your brother. And they're already in there. And we know that possession is 9/10 of the law, here and there. So it was not easy. And he wasn't quite going to give up yet, but he just went back and he got the elders round. And they were like, what shall we do? And the elders, they kind of took Jan's side and they went over to try and reason with Noe. And Noe might have come round, but his wife was like, no. He worked hard, we need this house. He did most of the work, it should be our house. They were not going to be dislodged. And so the elders came back, and they were the men elders. And they got together and they're just like, we don't know what to do. Maybe we should just leave it. And, Jan could kind of see that, but Jan's wife was not going to lay it down. And they were just kind of mumbling and trying to figure things out and making dumb plans that weren't going to work. When one of the oldest women in the village came over to Jan, and she had an idea. And she whispered in his ear, ish, wish, ish, wish, 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 while washing. And Jan was like, that's a great idea. That's the best thing I have heard. And he proceeded to take her advice. He went over to the new house and he said, Noe, could I speak with you? And Noe came out and he said, Noe, I am willing to just lay it all down, but could I please could I just put one nail in there in that row of nails, and that will be my nail, where I can hang my stuff on. And Noe was like, well, yeah, that should work. And he went inside and told his wife, and his wife was like, Mom, we don't have room. And he's like, look, it's just one nail. Let him have it. And so he put one nail in there. And he went off. And he went down to the creek. And he walked along the bank until he found a little hole. And he jabbed a stick in there, and he chased out an armadillo. And he gave it a good hard whack on the head with his club. And after he was done kicking around, he dragged that thing back up. And he hung it on his nail. And, Noe's wife did not like it, but it was his nail. What are you going to do about it? And, you can kind of avoid it for a day or so, because it's just an armadillo, and we're not squeamish. I mean, the house is built with cow manure. How squeamish can you be? But after, the second day, hanging there, it started sort of doing that decomposition thing. And the bugs inside, and it got fat, and sort of stuff started dripping out of the end. And it was kind of disgusting. I mean, you could smell it over the smoke from the dried cow chips and everything else. And it was nauseating. And, if you ever, know about nagging, it's like you put your wife in one of those situations, you'll hear about it. And by the third day, it was like, this is no good. And it was Jan's nail, so you can't do anything about it, right? It's his nail, he can hang what he wants on there. That was just the understood thing. And finally, Noe's wife said, look, I really kind of like my old house. After all, let's just move back. And so they just took all their stuff off their nails, and they just walked back to their house, and they started up the little fire, and they were just gonna, it smells so fresh in here. I mean, don't you notice that? Well, that solved the problem, and Jan was able to move in with his family, and of course they dispatched the armadillo and aired it out a little bit, and they lived on in community, and the wives were content, and it was a good thing. So, this story comes with two morals. You get 2 for 1 today. The first one is, if you have a really hard problem in your community, chances are there's an old woman that will have a solution for you. So give her space and listen. And the other moral is, in your life, don't give even one nail space to bad habits and sins, because that one spot will stink up your life and make it awful. Thank you so much for inviting me up here and listening so graciously to my stories. We're all telling stories. Be encouraged, do good work with your family and with your community. Humor is an important part of living a righteous life. Be playful with your children. Don't take yourself too seriously. Laugh at yourself. That's part of being humble. Be honest. Be kind. Notice others. Give little compliments. Be courageous. Love deeply. Be generous. And remember that dying is not the worst thing that can happen to a Christian.